I was reading this morning. There was a lengthy, call it, I think they used to call it a paean. I think that's how the word is pronounced. And it's in honor of Chuck Yeager, written in the Wall Street Journal. And of course, the legendary pilot passed away Monday at the age of 97. And I mentioned earlier he was well known for what he did following World War II as a test pilot and then training early astronauts. What is often overlooked is his history when he was a pilot in World War II. And it says Yeager shot down at least 13 enemy fighters. Now, he said he had shot down another one, but it couldn't be confirmed. He once downed 5 German aircraft in a single day. He was shot down himself over France, but made it across the Pyrenees and into Spain, sometimes disguised as a peasant and carrying a wounded companion. And when the war ended, he was just 22 years of age. It's an amazing story, an amazing life. He had a lot of encounters with a lot of other people in military service just because of his length of service. He fought in 3 wars. We're at 6 minutes after 8 o'clock. It is 12. We're joined this morning by Lieutenant Colonel Steve Hyle. Steve is retired from the U.S. Air Force, and I've mentioned before, his 20 years in the Air Force allowed him to meet some of the biggest names, perhaps, of the 20th century. Everyone from J.C. McConnell to Yeager to Neil Armstrong to Presidents Reagan and Bush and Bobby Knight and even the legendary Curtis LeMay. Steve is joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX with Bill Colley. Colonel, welcome back.
Oh, always good to be back.
I was going to mention when you were working with Yeager, that was in tragic circumstances following the Shuttle Challenger disaster, and you were the administrator of the commission at the time. And I think that what you had to do was essentially deal with some, well, let's put it this way, some rather large egos at the time.
Yes, I heard it caps with large egos.
Well, Yeager was infamous with one person I talked to. I had an old girlfriend back in the mid-'80s, and her brother-in-law was a doctor in the Air Force, and he had been stationed at a base where he got to know Yeager. And the doctor told me, he said he's got a massive ego. But I used to think, sure, that's true, but they used to say it's not bragging if you can actually back it up. After what he had done in life, I don't think he was going to be a shrinking violet. In fact, it was probably that outsized personality that allowed him to succeed.
Oh yeah. Most assuredly, but like you say, I think for what he accomplished, he certainly would get a pass for expressing his monumental ego in many ways.
Was he much like the character in the movie The Right Stuff that Sam Shepard played?
Not entirely. It was interesting how he came to be on the Challenger Commission, because he hated NASA, and that was because when the original Mercury 7 astronauts, they specifically required that you have a degree, college degree, which he didn't, and they did that to exclude him from the program, and he never forgave NASA for that. And then I think the other reason he was on the commission, the NASA director at that time, I think, insisted that he be on the board, and I think it was more or less to try to maybe make him feel a little better about what NASA had done. But he was a character, I'll tell you.
I don't think he probably suffered idiots well.
No, he called into the commission one morning, and it was the morning we were trying to find a receptionist that had an IQ above 37. I fired 4 receptionists over a period of about 8 hours, but this one receptionist was there sort of on a trial basis. And Yeager called in, and she put him on hold and forgot about him. And he called back about 5 hours later. He was traveling somewhere between there and there, and he called in, and I took the call because we were waiting for another receptionist to come in there. And he wasn't happy. He just, hey, you don't put Chuck Yeager on hold for 5 hours. He was going off. He wasn't a happy camper.
Did he get along well with the other commission members? Because Armstrong obviously didn't have much in the way of a big ego, but Sally Ride did, and I've often wondered how all of these people worked together.
Well, that's the interesting thing about it. Yeager only attended the first meeting of the commission members in Washington, of course, and he attended that meeting, and he never attended another meeting or participated in any way in the rest of the investigation.
Offered some initial input and then stepped back.
I don't know if he had any input, because I wasn't on the commission yet. That was during that week right after the challenges, so I don't know whether he made any kind of contribution or not, but he was a character in that way.
When you talk about his generation, and I was reading about his background, that he grew up in West Virginia and small community. He went back there for an event in his small town when he was an adult, and they put up a statue of him outside his old high school, and he shook his head, I guess, side to side, and said aloud that it was amazing they would do that because he was so wicked as a student.
You got to believe he was. That's for sure. He wouldn't even at the very end when we had the report complete, but every commission member had to personally sign it before it sort of became official, before it went to the president. And so all the commissioners came into Washington. They all signed it, except Yeager. He didn't show up, and it was getting later and later in the day. So I'll shorten the story as much as possible. But what I finally had to do was go. Had the Air Force do a special mission with the XR-71, the world's fastest plane at that time, and it flew into Andrews. I took the actual page out to the pilot of the Blackbird. He flew across the country to Yeager lived right outside of Edwards Air Force Base. So he flew into Edwards, and while they were refueling, Yeager shows up, and the pilot puts the paper, they have a signature page on the side of the plane. Yeager signs it. The pilot hops back in, and it was back in time for us to, with the original signature page, to go to press. So, yeah, he was cantankerous.
I got to ask you, Colonel, and just for those people tuning in, Lieutenant Colonel Steve Hyle is joining us this morning, and he was the administrator of the Shuttle Challenger Commission and retired now from the Air Force, and of course that brought him into contact with the late Chuck Yeager. One of the things that always strikes me, and we've talked about this before, you're a guy from Ohio. John Glenn was from Ohio. The Wright brothers from Ohio. Armstrong from Ohio. And Yeager grew up just across the state line in West Virginia. Is it something about the character of people there that leads them into flight and space flight?
Well, you could have to think so in that respect. Of Curtis LeMay was from Ohio as well.
Right, right. OSU
And
grad.
yeah, yeah, he had. I there must be something in the air around that particular part of the country. It is amazing uh, how many people were like that went on to be, sort of the giants of aviation. Grew up and were born in Ohio.
Well, when you think about it, though, not all of them had that swashbuckling air that a guy like Yeager had, because you told me that despite the public image of LeMay, that he was a very calm and quiet fellow.
Yes, yes, he was. Just he gave up. Uh, he gave up his cigar, and uh, the first time I met him was it was at March Air Force Base, and it was at a big reception. And everybody was looking, or I walked in, was waiting there looking for LeMay. I thought I'd find him I just looked for a big cloud of cigar smoke. But he was back in the corner just puffing away on his pipe, and he switched to a pipe, and he was very quiet, very cordial, and so I think he mellowed with time.
In Yeager's case, he made a statement near the end of his life that he was being asked about how much he'd accomplished, and he lived a long life, obviously. But he said if he was flying at the moment and the plane spun in, he said he would probably not have any issues with that, because he said that he was going to die that way. He would probably look back and realize that he had had a remarkable life, and that would be a good way to go out.
Yeah, that's the way he would want to. I mean, apparent that would be very appropriate, if you will. What made him such a great pilot was that was his vision. He had vision beyond 2020, almost like the eyes of an eagle. I've heard it described. So he could see things in a distance much further away than any average human, and his peripheral and everything was just beyond most humans, and then that's why he was such a great pilot.
Ted Williams, it was said, had the same vision, which made him a great hitter and a great pilot as well.
Right. So that was interesting. It was always funny. The commissioners weren't always in Washington because they still had other jobs. They'd either be out investigating or back in wherever they were living at the time. So the chairman, Richard Rogers, Bill Rogers, would come in and say, "Steve, get the gang back here in Washington for a meeting 2 days from now," or whatever. So I'd call and let them know, and I'd always call Yeager at the ranch. and he never answered the phone. It was always, that he named the Bell X1, which was the
plane after his wife.
Yeah, after Glamorous Glennis. And so she'd always answer the phone, and I'd say, "Yeah, hi, good morning," or afternoon. Mr. Yeager is the general here. "Oh no, he's up in he's up in Alaska hunting caribou, or he was out in Colorado fly fishing, or so he never came. He never showed up."
Colonel, can you hold on for a couple of minutes? We got to get to a break.
All right.
Super. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Hyle joining us this morning. Some thoughts about Chuck Yeager, the great flyer who died earlier this week, 20 minutes after 8 o'clock on KLIX. I mentioned, if you're just joining us, but I mentioned this earlier in the program, our current guest, Lieutenant Colonel Steve Hyle, worked with Chuck Yeager on the Shuttle Challenger Commission back in the late 1980s. Yeager was a member of that. Steve was the administrator at the time. Bill Colley with you, too, on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. We're at 10 at 8:23, and the Colonel was mentioning that Yeager was the type of guy who wasn't afraid to speak his mind, and that was, I think, one of the things the public very much knew about the man. And Colonel, I'm going to point out, I would say you're pretty much cut from the same cloth when it comes to saying what's on your mind. We were just talking off air for a moment. If I could get you to comment, because I know you've been very vehement about the election, and you had made your own Trump signs and the like, and we were just talking a couple of minutes ago about media coverage and the like, and you were telling me you have switched over. You're a convert to, what is it, Newsmax from Fox News.
Yes, I have, as are a number of people. And a lot of friends around here who have been diehard Fox listeners or viewers, and it should, it's not Fox anymore. They said if we want to hear any that kind of news that Fox is putting out, you can watch CNN because they're better at it.
Yeah, you really only get that 3-hour block in the evening on Fox, I think, with Carlson, Ingram, and Hannity, and that's really about it any longer.
Yeah, it is. And I was, Hannity said turned me off a long time ago. It's all about him, and he goes off on these soliloquies, and he never lets. He was like Bill O'Reilly. He asked his guests a question, and he'd get the guest would get halfway into his first sentence, and Hannity was telling him what he thought.
Got to be Irish ancestry.
Yeah, that's really. Yes, that turned me off. But this election, it's beyond anything that I could ever conceive. What's happened, and I don't think Trump is going to be able to pull the rabbit out of the hat on this one.
I do think it makes him stronger, though, if he wants to do this again in 4 years.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I like the way he's announcing now that he's going to run again. He's doing that to push back among all these other Republicans who wanted his job in 2024. And he's sort of, freezing them in place for that. But
I don't think anyone could beat him in a primary, or even get close.
Oh, no, and even more so. And the midterm election, by that time, I think people will have been exposed to what they have seen. Enough of them have buyer's remorse, and we'll take the House and the Senate.
Can we mention, by the way, just quickly, because I got about 2 minutes to go, you live about 2 miles from Joe Biden's summer beach home. The travel through that region when he's around has got to be just a mess.
Oh yeah, he comes into town with it's actually a caravan. I mean, he travels with all the Secret Service and at least 3 different Secret Service people, an ambulance. I forget what all, but it's quite a sight. We see them all over the place, and it's in this summer. It's going to be an absolute zoo because we don't want the summer White House to be here, but it is going to be, I'm sure.
Yeah, the traffic was horrific when I left 6 years ago, and I can't imagine it's gotten any better. And then you throw this in. Oof.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy.
Well, hey, I thank you much for your time. And if I don't get a chance to speak to you before Christmas, you got to give Linda and the family my best wishes for a Merry Christmas. And if you run into any of the other old gang at one of these old farts meetings, you got to mention that I said hello too.
Oh, I will. We people still talk about you and how's Bill doing, and of course I tell them you're doing great in Twin Falls, and so I will pass that along. we because of the COVID, we sort of suspended the conservative curmudgeon lunches.
Well,
But
I'll fly in one of these days for one.
we'd love it. We'd love you to do that. We'd make you our honored guest speaker.
Well, God bless you, sir. Good talking to you again, and we'll talk soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
See you, Bill.
Lieutenant Colonel Steve Hyle joining us this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I've got to get to a break for news at 8:30. Well, excuse me. No news at 8:30. Local news coming up following national news at 9 o'clock. But in the meantime, we have some messages from some very fine sponsors and very fine people. That's on the way. Bill Colley as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX. And Magic Valley this morning until 10 a.m. Plenty more to talk about before we wrap up today. It's already past the midpoint of the week. I struggle with that all the time, the flash of time as it goes by.